Okay, we're rolling.
All right, this is an interview at the Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society, Buffalo, New York. It is the 17th of May, 2007, approximately 11:30 a.m. Interviewers are Mike Russert and Wayne Clark. Could you give me your full name, date of birth, and place of birth, please?
Full name is Wayne William Mertz, M-E-R-T-Z. I was born in Buffalo, New York, and on October 18th, 1946.
Okay, what was your educational background prior to entering service?
I went to grade school, elementary school at St. Mary Magdalene's on Fillmore Avenue on the east side of Buffalo. Then to St. Joseph Collegiate Institute on Kenmore Avenue in the city. And then finally St. Michael's College in Santa Fe, New Mexico for a year and a half, and then the remaining 2.5 years matriculated at St. John Fisher College in Rochester, New York. And it was there that I actually committed to service for the Navy, going through the Navy flight program. I traveled down and swore in at Flatbush Avenue. It was in New York City. I can't remember the name of it. Floyd Bennett Field, which is subsequently closed. And it was the Vietnam era, so there was a lot of, we all had to serve one way or another. There was a draft, there was no numbers. Anybody that was able-bodied, this was at the height of Vietnam, 68, 67 actually. We all enlisted. I was in the process of graduating from St. John Fisher, and I decided that I was going to serve as a, I got notice that I was going to be inducted into the Army, and I said I didn't want to do that. So I applied for the Navy as well as the Air Force flight programs, and I got into both of them, and I chose the Navy.
Why?
I think it's because I'm a traditional type person. We're at the Historical Society, Buffalo and Erie County Historical Society. I think tradition is important, and the Navy had a lot of tradition. I'm on the board of managers here for the Historical Society, and I think learning from the past is very important for knowing who we are and where we're going in the future. So the Navy had a lot of tradition. The Air Force seemed to be a little younger, and so I picked it. And carrier landings kind of intrigued me. So although I'd never been a pilot, carrier landings intrigued me, so I wanted to go after that.
Okay, where did you go for your training?
Training started out in Pensacola, Florida, and we actually were enlisted for a while. We never really became an officer until about 6 months later, and then I was commissioned partway through flight training. There was a lot of us. There was a lot of Vietnam era pilots. There was a great demand for it, both in all military services. And that's where it started, Pensacola, Florida. Actually, the first place was Sawfleet Field. Just outside of, there was the main station, which was Naval Air Station, Pensacola. Sawfleet Field was exclusively a training base, BT-1 and BT-2. I was, can't even remember which one I was in. And from there went to a little air base. We flew the T-34Bs, T-34B, which was a Beechcraft Bonanza type military augmented aircraft. Then we went to Melton, Florida, and I can't remember the name of the base there. That's where we flew the T-28s, a bigger plane, big reciprocating radial engine aircraft, powerful little machine, and spent about 4 months there. I was married at the time, got married just prior to joining the service, married in September of 1968, and then 1 week later my wife and I drove down to Pensacola And I let her off in the apartment we rented, and she saw me about, I don't know, maybe 2 months later was the first time. And actually, the first time we held hands after that was at church. It was at Mass, and that's where you got to meet your wife, was at Mass. That was the only time you could talk to her. And then you go back to training. So that was in 1968. And then from Melton, went to Naval Air Station, Corpus Christi, Texas, for multi-engine aircraft training, which we flew the S2, was really a CAD, carrier onboard delivery type aircraft, high wing, twin engine, reciprocating engine aircraft. It was also used for anti-submarine warfare off the carriers. And that training lasted for about 6 months, and then at Corpus Christi, I received the wings, Naval Aviator wings. It was a very proud moment in my life because it's quite an accomplishment, more than I expected actually. But I learned that I could do things that I really didn't expect that I could do. Then from there, went to Guam because I was assigned. I volunteered for Vietnam at the time. I volunteered to join a squadron that was based in Vietnam. They asked anybody that wanted to go, and I said, yeah, I'll go. I figured if you're in the military, the best place to be is where the action is. And I was really trying to find a way to get out of the draft. And then I got to interact with the military for quite a while, and I liked what I saw. And the people I met, and I thought they were high quality people. So I went to Guam. My wife stayed back in the States and trained on what was then was with VW-1, which were the Typhoon trackers. And their normal mission, they had 2 missions. One was to follow and plot typhoons as they were going through the Pacific. In the Western Hemisphere, the hurricanes, and the Eastern Hemisphere, the typhoons. And their secondary mission was what was called the RAG, Reserve Air Group, which provided training for people that would be going into that equipment. And not the same mission, but the similar equipment. And they stayed there for about 3 months on Guam. And that's where I saw a bit of World War II history, because there are what they call tank tracks.
Mm-hmm.
And the tank tracks were remains of both U.S. and Japanese tanks that had fought battles on Guam. They were still there, and that was in 69 or 70, 1969 or 1970. Actually, I worked with the Boy Scouts. It was a Boy Scout troop, and I kind of filled time when I went to training with them.
Now, what was life like in Guam for you? Did you live in barracks or?
Yeah, I lived in officer
quarters?
quarters and training, and I never did go on any of their missions, only on the training side. I never did follow the Typhoon. For some reason, it didn't make sense. When I was a pilot, and I always learned to stay away from the storms, these guys found them and flew right in the middle of them. And the Navy had the low-level penetrations, 1,000 feet, down to 1,000 feet. And the Air Force had the high-level penetrations, which was more comfortable penetration. So it didn't sound too attractive to me. As a result, I stayed away from the mission on that. And life otherwise was the training days were very, very aggressive and very time-consuming and emotionally consuming, because you wanted to do well. On the other hand, there was a lot of time that you filled, and that's why I did some of the Boy Scout support. I do have a fond memory of running into or at the Officers Club. It was a stop for the Australian air crews that were flying P-3s to land. And I Agana, Guam was the city, and this is, I think it was Naval Air Station Agana, and they would stop there when they were crossing the ocean. And my memories were that these guys these Australian crews were very hard-working guys. They worked hard and they played hard, and they frequented the officers' club, and they were the best foosball players in all of the Pacific. They knocked the Americans out and nothing flat, and one of those tables with foosball. So that's and that was about, I think it was about 3 months, and then went from there to this is all on active duty, full time. I was a reserve on active duty. Went from Ganya up to Naval Air Station, U.S. Naval Air Station in Japan, Atsugi, A-T-S-U-G-I, if I can remember the name correctly. And it was south and I believe a little west of Tokyo by about 60 miles, or what would probably be 100 clicks. And that's where I joined the squadron, which was BQ-1. It was a reconnaissance squadron, and it did electronic reconnaissance, it did audio reconnaissance, it snooped around. We flew against all the communist countries, from the Sea of Japan, Vladivostok, all the way down to Vietnam. And deployments from Atsugi were primarily to Da Nang, Vietnam. And I did that on and off for a little under 2 years. They were a month on, a month off. The air base in Atsugi was a fascinating place. Traveled around to some of the foothills of Mount Fuji, but never went up there. Lived just off of the base. There were almost kind of weekly protests by the locals with regard to a variety of things, not as much the war, but mainly about employment on the base and things like that. They wanted to make sure that as many Japanese were employed as possible. Life in that squadron was one of uncertainty, because you would come home at night and you'd get a call at 7 o'clock and they would say, in the morning you're leaving and we're not going to tell you where you're going, because we were many of the planes were painted black with no markings, because we were in places that were confidential at the time. And we would pick up audio and electronic transmissions and interpret them. I was this is the EC-121M, which we flew at that squadron. That's what I was learning in Guam, was the Willie Victors down there. I call them Willie Victors. And they were platforms in which we would carry 20 people, maybe 25 people in the back, who were all electronics experts and audio and language experts, CTs, communication technicians in the Navy. And sometimes we would have Army people come along, and we listened to what they were saying, and we also listened to the electronic transmissions, or followed the electronic transmissions. In Vietnam, when we were in Da Nang, it was specifically for that whenever the SAM, surface-to-air missile batteries were firing up, aiming at a lot of the F-4 Phantoms that were going in for strikes. So we would be like the eyes and ears for their control. We would tell them, we would come out with transmissions saying in code specific places where the electronics transmissions were starting up, because they were going to launch missiles against our aircraft. And that's what we were like, early warning for attacks.
Now, did you hover off the coast, or were you?
We not quite hover.
Well, I know, yes, I know that.
Versus a helicopter or rotary wing.
Mm-hmm.
But we would fly very slowly.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes we would turn an engine off just to save fuel. And
These were four-engine craft?
four-engine aircraft. It was the I forget the Constellation was the civilian counterpart. It was the most sophisticated reciprocating engine ever made, and it was very efficient. It had the ability to kind of, even the exhaust gases were used for energy. But it didn't last long in the inventory because jets came out and turboprops came out that were even more efficient than that. But it was a comfortable aircraft, like I mentioned, maybe 25 people. There were 3, sometimes 4 pilots, depending upon the duration. On the longer flights, not related to my squadron, for as many as 18 hours, there would be 4 pilots. There were bunks for the pilots so that you could, because most of the day and a night that you were out. And
You must have had refueling then in there?
no,
You
we
could do
could
it all
fill up
in?
the wings held a lot of fuel, and we could loiter back, is what the term is, fly quite slowly and just listen and watch. We were sitting ducks out there, and if the MiGs came out of North Vietnam, we could have been cannon fodder for them, but fortunately we had BARCAP. That was the name, but I'm not sure what the acronym means, but it was a way for us to be safe. And every once in a while they would come by, because we might be flying at 130 or 140 miles an hour, 140 knots, and then the F-4s would dirty up. They throw their landing gear out, throw their flaps down, just like they were landing, get real slow, and say hello, and kind of wave to us, and then they'd peel off. Just to they let us know they were around, because otherwise. Flying those flights, those missions, was like I could describe it, and we've heard this before in aviation. It's like absolutely hours and hours of sheer boredom, interspersed with very occasionally moments of stark terror. And the stark terror came when something happened that you didn't expect, and that might affect the safety of the flight, or might cause you to have a bad day. And
For example?
I remember one specific, it was at like 3 in the morning. Things were very quiet. You're always monitoring, and you know, when you're most of our training, we trained even on those missions, even during those boring times with engine out, the circumstances, fires, and so on. But all of a sudden, one night, when we weren't doing it at this time, an enormous sound of explosion and smoke didn't quite fill the cockpit, but smelled like hell. All of a sudden, boom! The whole inside. One guy immediately said, "I think we're hit," and we weren't hit. It was pretty evident, pretty quickly. Nothing was done, and it took us a while to figure out. But there was a power supply for radar, and we had big radars on the aircraft. They called us the giraffe carrier, because there was an enormous radar on the bottom of the aircraft, and on the top of the fuselage, there was this long, thin, aerodynamic housing for a radar, another radar that went like this all the time. So there was a big power supply for that. It blew up. It didn't cause any major concern, other than it smelled like heck, and filled up the cockpit with smoke for a little while. But that's a moment of absolute stark terror, because you thought, well, this is it, you're going to die it. Didn't happen.
Were you ever under fire at all?
Never on in the air. We were always safer in the air, because of the U.S. military, the Navy, owned the Gulf of Tonkin at the time. Anything that came out was probably going to get shot down pretty quickly. And if it did make it to us, the F-4s would intercept them long before something from the ship would have got it. Or I should say, if the ship didn't get it, the ships. And we would work with a variety of aircraft carriers, the Kitty Hawk, the Ranger, or 2 that I can remember. And there were a lot of ticket ships out there. And those carrier task groups were formidable, so they would stop just about anything that came out. We were like 40, 50 miles off. During one of those missions, though, we worked very closely with an attempt, coordinated with all aspects of all services, to try to rescue people from the Hanoi Hilton. And this was in Haiphong Harbor. And it turns out that they landed there. We were part of the coordinating effort. They got the Navy SEALs in to the right place at the right time. Unfortunately, we had just moved the prisoners from one location to another, and it was unsuccessful. But I'm certain that the people in the Hanoi Hilton, were aware that this took place, and it just boosted their spirits. I'm sure it did, because otherwise, the place would be a miserable, rotten place. And people lived there for a long time. They were in prisoner war camps, like 7 years. I remember a guy named Alvarez who went there. Oh, I should mention, before I went to Guam, one of the most fascinating things I've ever done in my life was go through SUR school, Survival, Escape, Resistance, and Evasion, and that was based out of Coronado in the San Diego area. That's where the SEALs trained. And it was 5 days of learning a lot about yourself, about how you react to having no food and no water, at one point, no water, for just about 5 days, and how you react on having people chase you and trying to evade them. I had the waterboard treatment, things that you see now on torture stuff. I had that. We went through that. They trained us because that's what these guys went through. We were in a position to do that, to experience that. They isolated us in these small boxes once we got captured. I was able to evade for a couple of days, but then they said everybody's got to go to the camp. So we went into the camp, and the camp was looked just like Hollywood put it together, even better, because it was run by Navy enlisted guys, and this was the chance for them to hit officers in the face open-handed, but I came out with a couple of black eyes from it. You got into a box, and you did everything in the box, and you didn't get out of the box except when they took you out for interrogation. So the box became pretty dirty after a while, as you can imagine. And the interrogations happened a couple of times, and during the night, and they tried to break you. And I came pretty close, but especially when this guy told me about what he had done with my wife, and he obviously dug into the records. They had our records. So he told me about he was trying to get in under my skin. He got under my skin because they said he talked about some nasty stuff with my wife. So I said, that's it. And I went after him, and that's where I got whacked about 3 times. And I was next thing I knew, I was on the ground. And then they put you in these little boxes. And the little boxes, they say, how big are you? I was about 160 pounds at the time. And you get into a box where the top goes down, and they got to push you down to get into the box. Now when you do that, you can get claustrophobic very quickly. Mm-hmm. When you get crunched into a box, you're in the extreme embryo position, and they put you in the box. And that lasted, I think, for about 45 minutes. But that's the one point where I heard grown men scream and cry. I've never heard that before. And they broke a few people. They broke some people. One guy went into the box, and he came out. He was the senior officer, and that's what they're trying to do, is to break the senior officer. And he came out, and they had a formation after that. And he stepped aside and said, "We're no longer in charge here. I give up." I was surprised at that. I don't think he was able to have much of a military career after that. So you got very hungry. In that session, they had a propaganda training, in which they explained to me, they were explaining to us about how very wrong the United States is. And they're replicating what would be. And they said you could attempt to escape. So I had carved a stick into a very pointed, what would be a wooden knife. And while the instructor was had his back to us, he was writing something on the board. I jumped out and I put it right in his back, and he says, "You're done. We're all going, all 15 of us." And I said, "This is there's words you say and say, this is a scenario here. I just stabbed you in the back, and I'm taking everybody out." And everybody's looking at me and they say, "What the hell are you doing?" And he turned to me and says, "Time out. You can't do that. You can go, but you can't let anybody else go." And that was about the 4th day. So I was kind of grabbing it. So I says, "Okay, I'm gone. I'm out of here." And they ran out, it was like a trailer, and they ran out into the woods, and immediately machine gun fire comes across, because they know that someone's escaped. It's all blanks. No real guns, no real bullets. And then over the PA system says, I was Lieutenant JG at the time. They called me Lieutenant Junior Goat. Lieutenant Junior Grade is what it was. Lieutenant Junior Goat, Mertz, you got to get up because there's snakes all over that place. And I thought, I don't believe that. And then I saw a snake, and I went up and I went like this. I raised my hands and I said, "Get the hell out of there." The reward was a glass of milk and a sandwich. And after not eating, about the only thing I ate rattlesnake. We got a snake. I ate a snake the second night. The first night we were on the shore, I caught a fish, and we had a little piece of fish. And then we ate cactus. It was cactus because this was out, and actually they took us out to Warner Springs, I think was the name of the area. And you could carve out, you could have some meat off the cactus. We got a few prickly things out of that too. But then we went to, but I didn't have much to eat, so when I absolutely devoured the milk and the sandwich. And you can well imagine what happened to it. It didn't last long. It just doesn't. So there's a 5th day that we see airplanes fly over the local football field here, Buffalo Bill Stadium, occasionally, on very unusual occasions, but they do that as a flyby. Well, the reward was everybody was freed because the U.S. military come in. That is the scenario. And they had 4 fans flew over at about maybe 300 feet. And because a lot of people, I can't believe it. A lot of people, I mean, that was the time that we were rescued, but a lot of guys didn't get rescued when we went to Vietnam. So, you asked me about, was there ever any action? Well, the action was, actually when we got on the base, when we stayed on the base in Da Nang, we stayed in barracks. Officer barracks, and there were like 2 or 3 bunks, 4 bunks to a room. And about the 3rd night I got there, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong would come up with ways of throwing mortars at anything they could at the base. They were old French mounts, very inaccurate. If they aimed at something, they wanted them to aim at me because they never would hit me. And the barracks were adjacent to a bunker, and the bunker was about 60 yards from the exit, the egress of the barracks. And the 3rd night I was there, they came in pretty hot and heavy, and there was a lot of explosions. So I ran in my skivvies right out to the bunker, and most everybody ended up there, except not everybody. And then there was a second round a few nights later. They hit one of the nearby aircraft, and then that was on fire. And I ran into the bunker. And after that, after about a couple of months of this in and out stuff, and that was part of the thing, is harass the crews because they wanted to keep us on our edge all night. I read in Stars and Stripes, which was the military paper out in Vietnam, that, I don't know if it was in Chu Lai or where, but it was a direct hit by the mortars right on the bunker, and it killed 60 people. And the biggest exposure you have is when you're running out from the barracks to, so, and on the side of the barracks was sandbags that went up about 8 feet. So after that I said, if they're gonna hit me, they're gonna hit me, and I'll just stay in bed. And I slept through a lot of the attacks, but that's where the action was. Occasionally there were some snipers, but not too much. And for the most part, the only other nasty thing that happened was one of our planes had a mechanical problem on takeoff, and there were 22 people on the plane. This had happened just prior to my arriving at the squadron, and as it took off in Da Nang, it was in the southerly departure. They had a mechanical problem, and they were trying to pull out of it, but the plane veered to the right, and when it veered to the right, it caught a tower, and then a taller building, a taller structure nearby the runway. And then the thing just spun around. And one of the guys in our crew, Watkins, was one of the only survivors of the whole thing. His face was pretty messed up. They were working on the facial repair of his face. So that was, Vietnam was, the only other thing, I did live through a typhoon there. I was on duty one night. And that was pretty nasty, but nothing too difficult. And then once after that, I had a sailor on watch who was drunk, and he pulled his gun on me. We got a straight man out. Survived that. He wasn't a big problem, just I had to deal with it.
Can I ask you a couple of questions? When you were on these longer missions, were there bathroom facilities on the plane at all?
Right. Yeah. As a matter of fact, no problem at all.
How about food? Did you have food with you?
One of the best galleys in all of the Navy.
On the plane?
On the plane, right. So you can imagine guys that were out there. In our mission was typically 10 or maybe 12 hours. Actually, it was 10 hours on station, an hour to get there, an hour to get back. These people get hungry, so the food was well provided for. It was a much older plane, but certainly a nice environment. And it was a nasty war. There were a lot of people that I can remember. We had to have guns on the air crew. And I went for training one day, a number of times, but one day was near, the Vietnamese would take us, the South Vietnamese would take us to these gun ranges. And we'd have to go by escort because we all had above top secret clearances, and they didn't want us to get captured. So this one was a unique range, but it was right next to a POW camp, a South Vietnamese POW camp. And that's another time I've heard some screeching that I never heard before about men being tortured in there. I'm sure that's what was happening. I'm sure it was happening both ways. No mistake about it. And I also went through that SIR school for the purpose of being prepared for that, and it did happen. SIR school also convinced me that there would be no way, if I landed in North Vietnam, that I would go easily. I would figure out a way to escape. One way or another, I'd get out of it. And the best time to do that would be as early as possible. When you initially get captured, that's the first time. When you start get transported, that's a good time. All those times. Once you get into Hilton, you were probably there for a long, long time.
With the plane, with all the sophisticated equipment and so on, if you had engine problems or you were hit, were you to destroy the plane?
If we were hit? Oh, yeah, we would go on. I mean,
Well, I mean, did you have something on board that
Or whether we would shoot?
you would have to destroy the plane
Oh,
if it took?
uh, that was really never,
I was just
yeah, we didn't, actually the chances of us getting knocked out over land were pretty thin.
Mhm.
Unless a MiG directed us, and we probably wouldn't go anyway. We'd figure out a way to,
Mhm.
buy it out over the ocean or something. But this was the same squadron and the same aircraft that we converted. We maneuvered into P3s after that, which is a Lockheed Electric 4-engine turboprop. Still good lawyer, still turn, and they do it for any submarine. And this was electronic reconnaissance. I can't remember when. Maybe it was like in 2000, year 2000. There was a Chinese Chi-Com MiG that bumped into a P3,
Oh, yes.
and that P3 landed in Hainan
I
Island,
remember that.
and we flew off of Hainan Island many times. That's China, and we were engaged in electronic reconnaissance on all the communist countries up and down in that Asian area.
Were the majority of your flights to the northern area where you were monitoring the Soviet Union, Korea, China, or to Vietnam area?
We monitored off of Vladivostok, Korea. We lost a plane to the Koreans. This is before I was there. It was in when I got the orders. They lost a plane then, and that was like in 1969 or 1970, early 1970. They shot down a plane, and that was the same time of the Pueblo incident with Lieutenant Commander Booker.
Yes.
That was all in that area. The North Koreans were very, very aggressive. So that was the Sea of Japan, and then we went all the way down. And then, I don't know how much of this is, but I mean, everybody knows there was electronic reconnaissance going on. The P3 went down, and he was snooping. So that squadron now VQ1 is now based out of, I think it's Whidbey Island, no longer in Japan. I think many of the U.S. military bases are a lot thinner in Japan now, and that's based in Whidbey Island in the state of Washington, near Seattle. And they operate out of there.
Were there any experiences you had that stand out in your memory more than others? Besides the ones you told us already, or were there?
Just very briefly, there was one night, as I mentioned, where there was a lot of nights which were quite boring. And just as we took off, there was transmissions going on, and this is nothing that we did, just monitored the valor of people who tried to make sure that anybody who was in the battle and gets cut off from their units, that they get retrieved. And a helicopter, an Army helicopter went down, I don't know if it was a Huey or what, went down in North Vietnam. I don't know the exact location, but all night there was an on-scene commander who was kind of, I'm not even sure how he maneuvered this, but he was the on-scene commander, and he would bring anybody and everybody in there to sterilize the perimeter around this helicopter so that the North Vietnamese that were trying to get him, trying to capture the crew, wouldn't be able to do that. And there were jets coming in after they had done their mission, and they might still have some armament left, some bombs or some ammunition left, and he would direct them to come in and dump in that area so that these guys can, all night, this is like 6 hours, they worked at keeping that perimeter clean. And I left prior to them being prior to knowing. We got off station prior to that happening, to the rescue taking place. But I read in the Stars and Stripes about a week later that this mission was accomplished, that they kept the North Vietnamese the Vietcong away from that helicopter, and they were successful in bringing them safely back to their base. And that was a good thing. That was a very good thing.
Were there any people you served with that really impressed you more than others?
Oh, let me see. Well, I must say, when I was in Pensacola, I was impressed by this one. They had a football team called the Goshawks. It was a local Navy football team. And their quarterback was a fellow named Roger Staubach, who later threw footballs for the Dallas Cowboys. So I watched it a couple times. And that was in Pensacola in training. And, other than that, I got out of the active duty in 1973, in October of 73. My last year was as a recruiter in upstate New York, looking for other officers, primarily aviation, but also nuclear power. Was a big recruiting effort at the time for the submarines. Then I stayed in reserves, and I was in reserves. I flew P-3s out of Willow Grove, Pennsylvania, and I listed it on my paperwork there, BP 1123, which was a unit that flew P-3s, anti-submarine aircraft, and it was during the 80s. And spent a lot of time, long weekends, going all over the country and all over the world for training. Long weekends, I get down there for Friday morning and drive Thursday night, get down there Friday morning, we take off for Spain, we go to Rota, Spain, and then spend the night there, and on the way back we go to the Azores, stop at the Azores, fuel up, couldn't get all the way back, and then come back to the United States on via on the northern route, and come down into Philadelphia area. That's where Willow Grove was. One quick experience there was one night, late evening, not quite night, there was an electrical lightning storm up in New Jersey, and that's where we were headed. They have something called, I can't remember the name of it, St. Elmo's Fire. And it's electronic discharge, a static electric discharge. And actually I was a passenger on that plane because we lost an engine between the Azores and the States. And we ended up in Brunswick, Maine. Stayed there until the plane could retrieve us. We couldn't take the plane further back down to Willow Grove. And they were bringing us back to the Grove, and a lot of cloud-to-cloud lightning. We had something like that similar just a couple nights ago here in Buffalo. And it's really a show, but this thing hit the plane, and it's this green ball of fire. It looked like about 3 feet in diameter, and I thought it was spooky. I thought I'd never seen anything like it. And it went from the front of the aircraft, and I was in the radio position just behind the pilot station, and I looked out and I watched it go right out the back end. I'd never seen anything like that, and probably never will again. We got hit a number of times, and when we got to the ground, I mean, there was a lot of bangs on that plane. There were about 5 or 6 pinholes and burn marks where the lightning had struck the aircraft. And I kissed the ground when I landed that one because I thought we were not by it that night. I stayed in reserves and up in Buffalo here, and was about the number of the units. I became a senior ranking officer down at the Navy Reserve Center on Porter Avenue in Buffalo, and I commanded the SAC Land Unit, which was Supreme Allied Commander Atlantic, as a captain in the Navy, and that's where we had the opportunity to staff up communication stations, communication facilities for briefing the Admiral on what was happening in any exercise that we might have, and to brief SACLAT or his deputies. And that's where kind of the terrorist things, and we were turning into terrorist things more than we were doing Eastern European things, especially after the Berlin Wall went down. It became a different mission, and actually NATO's involved with Afghanistan right now, and had been involved with Kosovo. So that was a fascinating experience. Ended up in London and exercises as well as Portugal, Norfolk, Virginia, and those are the names, places. I retired in started out in 1968, left active duty in 1973, and then stayed in the reserves from 73, never missed a day, 73 until 1994. I think it's 27 years altogether. And I do it again in a New York minute. I thought it was a fascinating, learned a lot about myself, a lot about what human beings are like. And one thing I do in this year, there's no other place in the world that puts value on life like Americans do. We don't leave anybody behind. So.
Okay, have you ever stayed in contact with anyone that was in service with you?
You mentioned, I was with a fellow this morning, a guy named Don Keller, who just has a very good basis for understanding people and getting the best out of people. And Don Keller's a captain in the Navy, a reserve. For the most part, I think he spent about 3 or 4 years on active duty. He's been probably the most influential person in my military career, especially reserve career. Active duty, it bounced around so much, there wasn't hardly anybody that. There was one guy, Captain Clater, who absolutely at one of the briefings in the officers, I mean, I remember him, I don't know how good or bad this is, he was certain that by the turn of the century, the United States would be so overpopulated that we would have famine. There wouldn't be enough food in the year 2000, and he was convinced of that. I remember listening to some of his pontificating, and that didn't happen.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your interview.
Okay, thank you.